All right, what's going on, everybody? Let me just jump straight into this. I was in a conversation the other day, and we were talking about some of the laws that we have here in Florida, and of course, the stand your ground case, stand your ground law came up, and I know that we have a lot of people that feel like the stand your ground law is unfair, especially when it comes down to the issue of race. And many people feel like that every time a black person is shot by a white person, and that white person uh uses the stand your ground defense, they oftentimes get off. And my argument was that's not necessarily the case, and I know that it seems like it, mainly because that is the angle that the media comes from, and that's how the media plays it. But I said, if you go back and if you look at a lot of these cases and you take it on a case by case basis, and sometimes you have to look at the facts of the case, you may find otherwise. One thing that I've noticed is that in having these conversations, especially going back to the Trayvon Martin case, because that is the first time that a lot of people heard about the stand your ground law here in Florida. But if you go back to that case, you know, uh, a lot of people were saying, well, well, he murdered him, and how can he stand his ground? But what I find is that a lot of people don't go in, never pull up the statute, and actually read what the law says. And I remember when that happened back in 2012. I was out of the state at the time, but I had never heard of it. So I went and pulled it up, and I started reading. And what I discovered was that stand your ground, those words, they are three words in the old Florida self-defense law. And at the time, I noticed that it was in like paragraph two or subparagraph two, and it was three words that it was talking about self-defense. So I said, you know what? All right, let's just look at a couple cases, maybe a case or two where it happened. Black person shot by a white person, and the white person came from the angle where they tried to use the stand your ground defense, and it didn't necessarily work in this case. So the first case I'm gonna show y'all real quick, and that I brought up, I remember this happened in Pinellas County. And for those that don't know, Pinellas County is the Tampa, St. Pete, the Clearwater area. Uh, and if you remember, some of y'all may remember this, but it happened at a convenience store. We had a couple. We had the girlfriend whose name was Brandy Jacobs. You had the young man named Marquise McLaughlin, and then you had and what happened was they parked in. They were going to a convenience store, and they parked in a handicap spot. And then you had this concerned citizen by the name of Michael Drakus, who, while Marquise McLaughlin was in the store, he approached the girlfriend who was sitting in the car. I guess he took it upon himself because he felt some type of way about her parking in, this handicapped parking spot, and an argument ensued. So I'll stop right there because the video I'm gonna show y'all, it kind of talks about the case, and it talks about the outcome of the case. So y'all sit tight for a second, and let's just take a look at this real quick.
A stoic Michael Draca stared straight ahead as he learned his sentence. It comes after his conviction in the July 2018 shooting death of Marquise McLaughlin over a handicapped parking space in Pinellas County. Good evening, I'm Jennifer Lee.
I'm Keith Kate. Thank you for joining us tonight. Michael Draca faced 30 years in prison for manslaughter. The judge gave him 20. 8 on your side's Rod Carter joining us now live from the courthouse. A lot of eyes on this case, Rod.
Yeah, indeed. Not just here in the Bay Area, but across the world, really. And Michael Drake is here at the Pinellas County Jail. He'll remain here for the next couple of weeks until he is then transferred to a state prison. And this case, this trial, this sentencing, all hinged on a couple of elements, a couple of things: judgment and remorse.
I'm not really sure that I heard any remorse in this case. What I've heard is that the defendant felt that he was justified in doing what he did.
An expressionless Michael Drake listened to harsh words from a judge, and the family of the man he shot begged that judge to give him the maximum sentence.
I want him punished for what he has done to Marquise and our family. It is more important that he'll never be allowed to do it again.
In August, a jury convicted Drake of manslaughter in the killing of the father of four, all of it over a parking space at the Circle A Food Mart. Today in court, Drake, for the most part, sat in silence, except once.
Mr. Drecke, do you want to make a statement at all? No, Your Honor.
I asked his attorneys why he did not plead his own case.
What's the point? I mean, I actually agree with his position. It's better not to say anything at this stage, especially with all the very solid appellate issues we have. Nothing could be gained by any commentary by Mr. Drake at that point.
To the McLaughlin family, that silence seemed deafening. And although they are satisfied with the outcome, in court, his father said he is far from forgiving.
In the Bible, it says in order to get into heaven, we must forgive those who trespass against us. At this point in my life, I am not there yet. And if just so happened that the Lord chooses to take me before I come to terms with this, then I will see you in hell where you and I, we will finish this. Mark my words.
Drake's attorneys have 30 days to appeal the judge's decision, and they say they plan to do that within that time. Keith?
So here's a case that we see that the stand your ground defense was used and it didn't work. So he was sentenced to 20 years. He was facing 30, but he was sentenced to 20. Now let's just talk about this. I don't want to go too in depth about this case, but let's just talk about this real quick. In this case, what you had was a couple that went to a convenience store. They parked in a handicapped spot. Should they have? Well, it depends on what perspective you come from, but they did. But you also had this concerned citizen that just took it upon himself to approach the girlfriend, who was Brandy Jacobs, while she was sitting in the car about parking in the spot. So when Marquise McLaughlin came out of the store, the only thing he saw was, someone arguing with his girlfriend. And he walked up and he pushed Michael Drake down. And if you go back and if you look at the video, Marquise McLaughlin, he took a couple steps back, and and you can see Michael Drake has pull out his firearm. So this is where the whole stand your ground thing comes into question, because was he in fear for his life? And we'll look at the law in a second. Was he in fear for great bodily harm as well? But the one thing I want to point out is that here's a case where somebody should have just minded their business, right? Now we can say that they shouldn't have parked in that handicapped spot, which, okay, but he should have minded his business as well. And all this could have been, this could have been avoided. But, what this reminds me of is, y'all remember that summer, when this is when all the memes started coming about, and the first thing that comes to mind is when the guy was in the park in Oakland barbecuing, and the lady came up, which he had a permit to do so, but she called the police on him, and she should have minded her business. But that's when all the memes came about, and the term Karen came about. Everybody started using the term Karen and Ken or Kevin or whatever it is, where you had whites calling the police on blacks, not breaking the law, being in a place where they had a rightful place to be. There was a Starbucks incident. There was a little girl selling lemonade, so I guess my point is, a lot of things could be avoided if people just mind their business. There is a time and a place to get involved in things. But if people aren't breaking the law, and they're not really doing anything, sometimes you just got to leave people alone, because these situations can turn dangerous, and they can turn dangerous real quick, especially when a firearm gets involved and somebody gets shot. The first thing they're going to do is invoke the stand your ground law, if that state, wherever it happens, has stand your ground law. Now, I started this off talking about, a conversation, but and that I also realized that a lot of people have never read the Florida Stand Your Ground law. They have no clue what they said, because they take someone's word, or they'll watch the news and some attorney is on the news talking about it, and people take that and they run with it. So let's just take a peek and see what the law actually says for the state of Florida. So what I did was I just pulled the law from 2018 when this case happened. And what I noticed is people don't read the law. They don't know what it says. But what this is it's basically an expansion of the old Florida self-defense laws, what it is. And there's a couple things that I went in and I highlighted because, it's important to know. But what you hear is people they say I was in fear for my life. Well, where that comes from is basically paragraph 2 here, where it talks about a person is justified in using or threatening to use deadly force if he or she reasonably believes that using or threatening to use such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or herself. So what that means is basically that's where I was in fear for my life, came from. But the portion of that no one ever talks about is the great bodily harm portion of it as well. Another thing that's important to point out is that little part that says or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. Now, most people don't know what a felony and a misdemeanor is. So, sometimes people see someone committing a crime and, they won't take the firearm and go stop the crime. But let's just use a burglary, for example. Or you hear, let me back up. Or you hear well, they're protecting property. So what happens is, let's take a burglary, for example. Someone's burglarizing someone's house, or they're in a store, and they're robbing a store. In that case, that's a felony. So you hear someone went and they stopped them and they shot them, whatever. That's when they invoke or they try to use a stand your ground defense. But under the old Florida self-defense law, the person had, under the old Florida defense law, you had a duty to retreat. And what that means is, if you were in fear for your life or someone was threatening your life, let's say you're in a fight, what you had to do under the old law is that you had to try to if you could safely get away, you had to try to get away. All that changed in 2005 when Jeb Bush, who was our governor at the time, he signed this into law. And that's when the words, no duty to retreat, and has the right to stand his or her ground. That means you don't have to run away. If you're in fear for your life, you don't have to run. So that's where that's what that came about. So this is nothing more than the expansion of the old Florida self-defense law, and they call it the stand your ground law, and that's where it comes from. Those 3 little words, right? Has the right to stand his or her ground. I just think that, it's important that we know and we read the laws. We got to know laws. That's really important. Because people go off of what they think or what they heard. And the one thing that I learned is that there is a difference between what is morally right and what's legally right. And oftentimes what is morally right is legally wrong. So that's why people are oftentimes dismayed or they're baffled when these cases like this go to court. And, we all feel that morally the person was wrong, but in the eyes of the law, they were right. And we can get into the biasness of the laws, and the laws are not fair. And that's a whole nother video in how some of these laws are written. But again, we have to know, it is crucial that we know the laws. So let's look at one more case that happened here in Florida that deals with the stand your ground law. This case happened back in 2014, and what it was they called it the movie theater shooting, and what it involves 2 men or 2 men. They were in the movie theater, and one man was he was texting the babysitter in the movie theater, and the guy behind him, who was an older gentleman, told him to basically put his phone down, and one thing led to another. So let's just take a quick look at this case, because it's just kind of on the topic of what we're talking about.
And back here at home tonight, an update, a surprising turn in a case that made headlines across this country. You'll remember the older man accused of shooting a young father who was texting the babysitter during the movie preview? Well, tonight, ABC's Matt Gutman tells us about the new twist in his defense.
Nicole Olson, speaking out for the first time, describes the moment her husband Chad was killed after texting in a movie theater.
And just to think that in the blink of an eye, my whole world just got shattered into a million pieces. And now I'm left trying to pick them up.
The Olsons were enjoying a rare night out.
I was just so excited and looking forward to spending a day with the love of my life.
Before the movie started, the screen lit up with that now familiar announcement, turn your phones off.
Really? This is the most important scene? Your cell phone rings?
Chad Olson sent one last text to the babysitter, and prosecutors say that annoyed the man sitting behind him, retired police captain Curtis Reeves. Police say the two men started arguing, then stood up. At that point, Olson threw popcorn at Reeves. Reeves pulled his handgun, fired, and killed Olson. Reeves was charged with second-degree murder. He's now claiming self-defense.
He was hit in the face with an unknown object. At that point in time, he has every right to defend himself.
But attorney Mark Aguilar says that won't hold water.
The problem is that popcorn traditionally isn't recognized as a deadly weapon.
Reeves' lawyers are likely to invoke Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law. Added to that, under Florida law, there are harsher penalties for those who attack people over 65. Reeves is 71.
But the issue is, what kind of condition is he in? Is he a frail 71? Or is he somebody who could fight off someone if needed and doesn't need to pull out a weapon under those circumstances?
He faces up to life in prison if convicted. Matt Gutman, ABC News, Miami.
So here's another case where the stand your ground defense was used, but once again, it was denied. Now, there are some where, people have used, and we all know this, they've used the stand your ground defense and it worked, and, they were never prosecuted. But I've just showed two cases where the stand your ground defense was used and it was denied. Now, this case is a little bit different. It's a little bit unique. This happened back in 2014. And this case still has not gone to trial yet. Unlike in the case with Michael Dreka, Michael Dreka was never arrested. Well, not at first he wasn't, because the police, said that it was a stand your ground case, so they didn't arrest him. But then they went back and relocated. He in prison right now. But in this case, Mr. Reeves was arrested, but he's out on bond. I think he bonded out on a $150,000 bond, but he is on house arrest. Now, there's a couple things that come into play in this case, and that is, as the news report said, that he's retired, police captain is what he is. So, could that play into the law? Maybe, maybe not. I know, of course, we all say, oh man, he was a police officer, so of course they're gonna look out for him. But he's now 77 years old. He's out on house arrest. And they're still fighting this case. The case has never been to court. Here's something else about the stand your ground law that a lot of people don't know. In 2017, there was a change to the law, and you can read it. But in 2017, what happened was that there was a shift, and there was a change to where now prosecutors, not the defense, has the burden of proof in pretrial, and what they have to do is the prosecutors have to prove that the defendant does not have the right to invoke stand your ground. And what they have to do is they have to provide clear and concise evidence showing that they don't have the right to use stand your ground. So again, it's important that we know these laws. We have to, and we all get into the barbershops. The barbershop is a very fun place, and we have these conversations about these cases. And a lot of people are talking about laws and rules and stuff that they really don't know about, or they haven't read, or what they heard about. Another thing, and I'm gonna go on a tangent real quick. When we start talking about laws and the court systems and all this stuff, it's important that, we sit on these juries as well. And everybody I know try to get out of jury duty. In the judicial system, it's supposed to be a jury of our peers. And another argument that comes up was, you looking at the jury members and they don't look nothing like you, right? And everybody will say, oh, these ain't my peers. Really what it is the jury's supposed to be made up of citizens. But it's important that, some of that jury look like you, That's important, especially if you're a minority or a black person in this country. And I'm not making a race issue, but we do know that the court system oftentimes is not fair. So I'm gonna encourage y'all, man, to when that jury, if you can sit on a jury and jury duty comes down, let them eliminate you. Don't eliminate yourself, because it's important on some of these cases that, you know, we sit on juries, you know, and you can't get mad that if you did everything in your power to get out of jury duty and then the verdict comes down and the person's guilty or whatever, you had an opportunity to sit on the jury and you didn't. But anyway, man, I just wanted to talk about, you know, a conversation that I had, because here in Florida, and you know, the stand your ground law, it really is a hot topic. And a lot of people don't know anything about it because they don't go in and read. So I highly encourage you all, if you don't read laws, I highly encourage you to go in to read the laws, because, you know, we can all argue about it, but at the end of the day, it would eliminate, you know, a lot of confusion if you read it for yourself. I also think that it's important that we need to understand that there are many things that we consider to be morally right, but in the eyes of the law, they are legally wrong. Be safe out there. Be blessed. I'm out.